Okay, so we're going to cover the elements of art today. So just like in science class, where you have the periodic table of elements, in art class, you have this 7 items here that build up all of the art pieces you're going to make. Now, in this class, and any other time in your life that you make an art piece. So there are 7 of these that I'm going to go through for my art class. Now, if you were to Google this list or to sit in on another art teacher's lesson, sometimes they drop it down to 6, or they might rename some of these, but in the end, they are basically the same concepts. Sometimes they combine shape and form. But these are the 7 that we're going to talk about this year. So let's start with lawn. Okay, so just remember, you can also use all of them together to create, or you can choose just one of these and create interest based on just that element of art. So like I said, we're going to start with line this year. A line is a point in space. It's moving to another place. So if you take a pencil across a piece of paper and drag it across, you've created a line. If you drag it across crazily, you've created another different line. If you curve it up and over, you've created a line. All of those things are a point, or you have dropped a point and drug it through space. Now, line is the most basic element, but it also is the most powerful. Most every art piece is going to have a version of line to it. There's very few artists who have created totally without line. So Picasso is a great example. His sketchbook entries here are very linear. When we talk about line in the next couple weeks, we are going to cover line variation, the weight of a line, quality, contour, blind contour, and then what it means to be an implied line. Moving on, the next element that we'll talk about will be shape. Shape has length and width, just like the shapes on this imagery. That just means that it's two-dimensional and flat. Shapes come in 2 basic categories. You will have geometric and organic. Geometric will be one that you can kind of give a name to, like square, rectangle, circle. Those are the ones that are tied to that math subject of geometry, whereas organic are free-form shapes. So Matisse is a really great artist to look at for those, because he just used his scissors to kind of go into a piece of paper and cut random free-formed shapes, which would fall underneath organic. The next element, form. Now this one is where you guys will have a lot of fun, because this is your sculptures. So this is length and width plus depth, so meaning that we have created 3-dimensional objects. So one of the sculptors that we talk about will be Deborah Butterfield. She uses recycled objects to create horse forms. So here you can see there's some metal, along with like metal marquee lettering. But it's taking your artwork into that 3rd dimension of making it to where it can stand up by itself. It has to have some sort of balance. It creates shadows because it is now 3-dimensional. Now the other part of that is you can show form in a 2-dimensional artwork. So on these pairs over here, through value, you will be showing form. So we'll talk about value in just a second. But that is form. Now here's value. Value is going to be the lightness and darkness of an object. So this is going to be where you work on shading. This is the part of the year and thing you will get most from this class, I believe, is that you will be able to go from your basic drawings into something that's more valued. There's a lot of differentiation in this. So hopefully you'll move from one category into the other. Now this is a nice example of how value adds a lot to a drawing. We will go through and talk about different ways to shade. Now this one is using blending. You can see how smooth it looks. It's called photorealism. This is a very advanced drawing. But there's other ways that you can add value to your drawing, meaning adding shading, the value scale of light to dark. There's hatching, which is just little line tick marks, line. Cross hatching is where you go back and you double cross the lines. So you start to get this X effect where they're going in different directions. Stippling or pointillism is my favorite. I have a few art pieces of my own from high school that were strictly stippling, and it takes a long time to do, but they're very, very effective in the end. And then there's random marks. Some people like to use letters, like this almost looks like letters, or writing to do this. Some people like to use scribbles or hashtags. Um, there's different marks you can kind of make that are your own that could add value to a drawing. Okay, moving on, we have color. Now this is the bright rainbow pretty part of art class. This is how light is refracted and it appears to the human eye. But we're going to learn the 12-section color wheel, which just means that we will talk about the primary colors, red, blue, and yellow, along with the secondary colors of violet, orange, and green. And then we'll also cover the intermediate or tertiary colors that fall in between that. So your blue greens, your red violets, your red oranges, all those extra colors that fall in between those two categories. And it ends up being 12 different colors. Now over here I just threw in some of my favorite painters. This down here at the bottom is a poster by Peter Max. He was an artist during the 70s. Used a lot of color in all of his designs. They're prints. Very awesome work if you ever want to give him a search. Peter Max is his name, but it's album cover art. Then up here is just Vincent van Gogh. This is one of his lesser known paintings for most people. This intense green is a couple hundred years old now, and it still is very, very intense to look at. It's very neat to see. All right, texture. This is the feel or the appearance of a surface. So you can guess what texture is with your hands, but how do you translate that with your eyes? Okay, so there's two ways. So photography would be showing you actual texture. Okay, or if you can get up to that photorealism style of drawing, that is showing actual texture where you can tell that this is rope. It looks like you could reach out and just touch it and it would feel exactly how you think it's going to feel. Implied texture is where you're using line patterns to mimic a texture from real life. So for example, when we draw wood grain, we're using an implied texture. When we're drawing animals, scales, fur, feathers, we're drawing implied texture. Now, if you were creating a sculpture or gluing things to your paper, you might get more into the actual texture. All right, now space is going to come into play with several of the projects we do here at the beginning because it's just part of your composition. It is the distance or area around, between, and within the components of a piece. So your Zentangles that we work on next week are going to have this element of whether they are negative or positive. So that means, is it the space where something is happening, okay, the positive space, or is it the negative space that you look to first? There's also the idea of open or closed, shallow or deep, two-dimensional or three-dimensional. So if you look over here at this one, you could tell this is shallow because it looks like that face is right up against the silhouette of those hands. These are both two-dimensional forms. It does not show a sculpture, but if we go back to our sculpture of the horse by David Butterfield, this is when space becomes 3D. So you can see there is a negative space between the horse's stomach and the floor, or between its neck and the floor, or neck and legs, that you have to start considering when you are creating. So let's get back down to space. So, and then there's also open or close. So that just means, like, did you close out this negative space like a shape? Like it's outlined or it's defined? Like this negative space that became her face is you can tell exactly where it is. But over here it's more open and left to the imagination. Okay, so those are the basic elements of art. Thank you.